I met Julian at a local climbing gym last June. I was working on a difficult route when he offered a tip. He seemed like a genuine guy, really into the sport. We ended up talking for nearly an hour about gear and trails. He had a massive social media following, full of travel photos. He looked like the ultimate outdoorsman, always active and fit. We swapped info, thinking we might hit a trail sometime. Usually, these gym friendships fade as soon as you leave. But the very next night, I was at a brewery for a friend's birthday. I posted a quick video of the band to my story. Not even 20 minutes later, Julian taps me on the shoulder. He claimed it was his favorite spot for a Saturday night drink. It felt like a lucky coincidence at the time. I introduced him to my friends, and he fit right in. Julian started hanging around my social circle more often. A week later, he invited me on a weekend trip to Colorado. He wanted to tackle some specific peaks I'd always dreamed of. I checked my work schedule and realized I could make it work. I tried to get my best friend Sam to come along, but Sam was broke and couldn't get the time off. Julian said none of his usual crew could make it either. So, it was just going to be the two of us. We flew into Denver on a Tuesday evening. Julian had already rented a rugged SUV for the mountain roads. We stopped at a local shop for groceries and a few cases of beer. By the time we reached the cabin, the sun was long gone. The air was crisp, smelling of pine and cold earth. We cracked open a few drinks to celebrate the start of the trip. Julian seemed high energy, ready to stay up and talk shop, but I was exhausted from the flight and ready to crash. That's when I realized the cabin only had one bedroom. I hadn't thought to check the booking details. Julian pointed to the living room sofa and said it was a sleeper. He told me not to worry about the cost of the rental. Since he was paying for the whole place, I didn't complain. I pulled out the mattress and found some extra blankets. It wasn't perfect, but it was better than a tent. I fell asleep almost instantly as the mountain wind picked up. I'm a notoriously light sleeper. Even a floorboard creak wakes me. Around 300 a.m., I heard footsteps near the kitchen. I opened one eye and saw Julian's silhouette by the counter. He was just standing there, staring out the dark window. He didn't have a glass of water or a snack. He was just watching the woods in the pitch black. I rolled over, assuming he just couldn't sleep. The next morning, he was up early, acting like a drill sergeant. He was full of smiles, making coffee and checking our gear. I brushed off the weirdness and focused on the hike. We drove deep into the Rockies to reach the trailhead. The scenery was breathtaking, but the elevation was brutal. I didn't realize how much the thin air would affect me. Julian, however, seemed completely unfazed by the climb. He was practically jogging up the switchbacks while I struggled. Every few minutes, he'd look back and laugh, telling me to hurry up. I was drenched in sweat, and my lungs were burning. We stopped at a ridge to take photos of the valley below. The view was incredible, but Julian's behavior felt different here. He kept insisting on taking photos of me from far away. He'd tell me to stand closer to the edge for the perfect shot. I laughed it off as him being an intense photographer. But looking back at those photos, I wasn't the only one in the frame. We got back to the cabin late that night. Julian was already cracking open a fresh case of beer. I was absolutely exhausted from the high-altitude hike, but he seemed to have more energy than when we started. We sat out on the deck in the cold mountain air. I could tell right away that he was a heavy drinker. He kept pushing more and more drinks on me. Eventually, I lost track of how many I'd actually had. The room started spinning as the alcohol hit my system. I finally told him I had to crash on the sofa. I plugged my phone into the wall right next to my head. I remember seeing the green, charging light before I blacked out. But even in my sleep, I felt like someone was watching. Around 2000 a.m., I woke up to a distinct sound. It was a sharp floorboard creak right next to me. The sound of weight being put on the old wood. I stayed perfectly still, eyes closed, listening to the cabin. The silence was heavy and felt almost suffocating in the dark. Then I heard the click of Julian's bedroom door closing. I heard the small sound of the lock turning shut. I reached out for my phone to check the time, but as my hand moved, it only hit empty air. The charging cable was dangling from the wall, completely empty. I sat up, heart racing, and scanned the dark living room. I found the phone sitting on the far kitchen counter. It was 10 feet away from where I had left it. Julian was already in his room, so I just went back to sleep. The next morning, Julian acted like nothing had happened at all. He insisted that I take the bedroom for the final night. He said he felt bad about the couch and wanted to be fair. I didn't argue because I was still hungover and tired. I just wanted a real mattress and a door that locked. I went to bed early, but I woke up an hour later. There was a strange, cold breeze blowing through the room. Through the ruin. I looked down at the floor and screamed at the top of my lungs. Julian was lying face down right next to the bed. He was sprawled out, like he'd just collapsed there in the dark. When I yelled, he looked up with a blank, confused expression. He claimed he was so blacked out he didn't know the room. I told him to get out, and I finally locked the door. I thought I was safe, but the worst was yet to come. I woke up one more time that night to a sensation. Someone was sitting on the edge of the mattress, very slowly. I opened my eyes and saw Julian's silhouette in the dark. He was sitting at the foot of the bed, staring at me. Then he reached out and started rubbing my bare foot. I screamed at him to get the hell out of the room. He didn't move at first, just watched me with those eyes. I had to physically push him out and slam the door. I packed my bags immediately, my hands shaking with pure fear. Julian sat on the couch, watching me like a creepy NPC. He didn't say a word as I fled to the airport. Later, I messaged a guy from his old climbing photos. "He's a total freak," the guy wrote. "Block him and run." He told me Julian had a long history of this predatory behavior. I blocked him and never spoke to that monster again. That experience left me paranoid for months after I got back, but eventually, I tried to move on with my summer. A few weeks later, I visited my old friends, Sam and Ely. They lived down in Texas, right near the humid Gulf Coast. They wanted to do a beach weekend to celebrate the break. I needed the distraction after the disaster in the Colorado mountains, so I packed a bag and agreed to make the trip. We drove down to Galveston on a bright, blistering Friday afternoon. The heat was already shimmering off the long stretches of asphalt. The air was thick with salt as we crossed the bridge. It felt like a normal summer trip, which was a relief. I really needed to clear my head and just have fun. We checked into a small rental house near the seawall. Galveston, at night, has a very specific, lonely kind of vibe, especially when you get away from the bright tourist boardwalk spots. We spent the first day eating greasy food and watching waves. By midnight, we were back at the house and getting bored. Sam suggested we head down to the beach for a walk. There's something peaceful about being near the ocean in the dark. The beaches there are wide and flat, stretching out forever. We grabbed a couple of flashlights and headed toward the surf. The town was quiet, with only the sound of distant traffic. The crashing water was the only thing we could really hear. We thought we were the only ones out on the sand. The moon was mostly hidden, making the visibility very poor. We walked along the edge of the water, letting it hit our feet. We walked for about a mile, just catching up on life. We talked about college and told old stories from high school. The dark sand looked like gray ash under the cloudy sky. We stopped near an old wooden pier to rest for a bit. That's when Eli suddenly went quiet and grabbed my arm. He pointed down the shoreline into the deep, black shadows. About 50 yards away, I could see a dark, thin shape. It was a person, but they weren't moving a single inch. They were just facing the ocean, staring out at the waves. They were standing perfectly still, like a statue in the surf. We watched them for a few minutes, waiting for a movement, but the figure remained frozen, ignoring the wind and the spray. Something about the posture made the hair on my neck rise. Then the figure started to walk, but it wasn't normal. The movement was stiff and mechanical, like a broken toy. It looked like a puppet being pulled by thick, invisible strings. Their arms stayed glued to their sides, never swinging once. Their head was tilted at a sharp, unnatural angle to the side. They weren't looking at the water anymore. They were watching us. Sam joked that it was just a drunk tourist having fun, but the laughter died in his throat as we kept watching. The figure stopped again and just stared, silent and sharp. Its silhouette was a jagged black shape against the white foam. Then, without any warning, it dropped into a low, deep crouch. And then it started to run, faster than anything I've seen. It wasn't a normal sprint. It was a terrifying, high-speed glide. It was coming straight for us across the open, dark sand. Ely's flashlight cut through the dark for just a second. The beam caught the figure mid-motion. He was grayish-white, like a drowned corpse. He wasn't wearing a shirt, just heavy, wet jeans. His arms hung completely limp at his sides, but his head was tilted at a sharp, unnatural angle. His eyes were wide, bulging with a blank, predatory focus. The second the light hit his face, he didn't flinch. He just erupted into a full, impossible sprint. There was no build-up, no gradual acceleration. He went from standing still to a high-speed charge. It was like he was being launched by a machine. He was coming straight for us across the sand. The silence of the beach was shattered by our screams. We bolted toward the wooden steps of the boardwalk. I could hear Sam behind me, gasping and yelling to run. My feet pounded into the deep, soft sand. Every step felt like I was moving through wet cement. My lungs were burning with the humid night air. I didn't dare look back over my shoulder. I just knew that thing was closing the gap. We reached the stairs and scrambled up the wood. We didn't stop until we hit the asphalt of the street. Under the yellow glow of a street lamp, we finally turned. The beach below us was completely, hauntingly empty. There was no sign of the pale man anywhere. The only sound was the rhythmic crashing of the surf. We stood there, shaking, trying to catch our breath. The darkness of the shore felt like a mouth that had closed. We fumbled for the keys and piled into the car. The drive back to the rental house was a blur of panic. Once inside, we locked every single door and window. Sam pulled the heavy blinds shut, his hands trembling. We didn't turn on the main lights, fearing we'd be seen. We just sat in the kitchen, staring at the front door. Every creak of the old house made us jump. We stayed up until the first gray light of dawn. None of us could close our eyes for even a second. I kept expecting to see that pale face at the glass. The silence of the night felt heavy and suffocating. We were 3 grown men, terrified of a shadow. The vacation was over. We just didn't know it yet. The next morning, we went back to the beach one last time. We needed to see where it happened, to make it make sense. We found our own tracks in the sand near the tower. Deep, messy footprints where we had turned and run. But where the pale man had been standing, there was nothing. The sand was perfectly smooth and undisturbed. There were no prints leading to us, and none following us. It was as if he had been floating above the ground. The realization made a cold knot form in my stomach. We didn't talk much on the long drive back home. We just wanted to put as much distance as possible between us and that stretch of gray, haunted coastline, but the distance didn't stop the dreams from starting. A week later, Ely texted me in the middle of the night. He was having the same recurring nightmare I was. In the dream, I wake up in my own bedroom. The air is thick with the smell of salt and rot. And there he is, standing in the corner of the room. He's soaking wet, dripping onto my carpet. His head is tilted, his bulging eyes fixed on me. He doesn't move, and he doesn't say a word. He just stands there, watching me while I sleep. Sometimes, I wake up and hear a sound in the hall, the unmistakable squelch of wet footsteps on wood. But when I check, the hallway is always empty. The fear follows you home, and it never truly leaves. Then, a few months ago, I found the validation. I was scrolling through a local Galveston history group. Someone had posted a grainy, dark photo from the beach. It was him. The same posture, the same pale skin. The caption asked if anyone knew the creepy beach walker. The comments section sent a chill down my spine. A spine. Dozens of people had seen him over the last decade. One person watched him walk into the deep water and vanish. Another found wet footprints on their second-story balcony. No tracks leading up the stairs, just wet marks by the door. I realized then that we hadn't just seen a person. We had encountered something that belonged to the sea. I'll never go back to that beach after the sun goes down. Some things are better left alone in the dark. I grew up in a small coastal town in Massachusetts. It's the kind of place where everyone knows your business. Every summer, I worked as a dock boy at the local marina. It was hard work, but the nights made it worth it. I was 19 that year, and my friend Toby was with me. Toby was the guy who always had a plan and a fake-eyed. After a long shift, we just wanted to get on the water. My family owned an old center console boat I could use. We grabbed a couple of cases of beer and headed out. The plan was simple. Find a quiet spot and just chill. The ocean at night usually felt like our private playground, but that night, the water felt different, almost heavy. We didn't know that our social circle was about to expand, and we didn't know how dangerous that new company would be. We drove the boat out to a spot near the peninsula. It was a popular place for locals to anchor and hang out. By 7 o'clock, the sun was low, painting the sky purple. There were 2 other boats anchored about 50 yards away. We threw the anchor down and cracked our first beers. The music from the boat to our left was muffled and upbeat. It felt like a typical, safe summer night on the Atlantic. We were laughing, talking about girls in the coming semester. Eventually, the boat to our right pulled up their anchor. They waved as they motored back toward the harbor. Then, the music on the other boats suddenly cut out. The silence that followed was immediate and jarring. We figured they were just heading in for the night, too. But as the light faded, I noticed 3 shapes on their deck. They weren't moving. They were just standing there, watching us. I was drunk, so I just laughed at first. I thought they were just tourists being weird. But Toby wasn't laughing at all. He was staring at those 3 shapes with a look of pure terror. They were standing perfectly still on the edge of their deck, just watching us in the total, oppressive darkness. The music from their boat had stopped completely. The silence was heavy, like it was pressing down on the waves. I tried to make a joke to break the tension. I told Toby they were probably just admiring our old boat. But deep down, I could feel my own heart starting to race. There was no reason for them to be that still. It felt like we were being hunted by 3 human statues. Toby kept whispering that we needed to leave, but the alcohol made me feel bolder than I actually was. I grabbed the megaphone from the steering console. I pointed it at their boat and yelled something stupid. I shouted, "Hope you're enjoying the show, fellas." Toby hissed at me to shut up and put it away. He said I was just provoking them, making it worse. The 3 figures didn't flinch or wave back. They didn't even shift their weight as the boats rocked. They just remained in that state of pure observation. It was like they were waiting for a specific signal. A signal that only they could hear in the dark. The playful vibe of the night was officially dead. I was putting the megaphone away when I finally heard it. A laugh drifted across the water from their direction. It wasn't a friendly laugh, or even a drunken one. It was slow, low, and incredibly raspy. It sounded like someone whose throat was full of dry sand. A sinister, knowing sound that made the hair on my neck stand up. That was the moment the alcohol lost its power over me. I went from buzzed and joking to stone-cold sober in a second. Toby grabbed my arm, his grip like a tightening vice. He whispered that we needed to go, right this second. I didn't argue or try to make another joke. The air around us felt like it had dropped 20 degrees. That laugh was the sound of a mask finally slipping off. Then came the sound that changed everything. 2 distinct, heavy splashes hit the water near their boat. I looked back and saw only 1 silhouette remaining on their deck. The other 2 were in the water, swimming toward us. Toby didn't wait for me to react. He lunged for the bow and started hauling up the anchor. I could hear the frantic splashing getting closer to our hull. They weren't swimming like people in distress. They were moving with a terrifying, rhythmic speed. I scrambled to the steering wheel, my hands fumbling for the keys. I could hear Toby grunting as he pulled the heavy metal. The darkness of the water made it impossible to see them, but I could hear them breathing heavy and ragged. They were only a few yards away from our stern now. I heard a heavy thud right behind the motor, then a wet, slapping sound against the fiberglass. I turned my head, and my blood turned to pure ice. A pale, wet hand gripped the metal railing of our boat. Someone was trying to pull themselves up from the black. I didn't wait to see a face or hear another laugh. I lunged for the keys and twisted the ignition. The engine roared to life, a beautiful, loud scream in the night. I didn't even check to see if Toby had the anchor in. I just slammed the throttle forward as hard as I could. The boat lurched, throwing us both toward the back seat. I heard a sharp grunt and a splash as the hand lost its grip. We were moving, but we were heading straight for the shore. In my panic, I had forgotten about the massive sandbar. We managed to get the boat off the sand and back to the docks. We didn't say a word as we tied her up and ran for my truck. I needed to get Toby home, and I needed to be behind locks. The drive to his place took us through a dense patch of pine forest. The roads there are narrow, winding, and completely unlit. Usually, I love the smell of the pines in the summer air. But that night, the trees felt like they were closing in on us. Every shadow looked like a person standing by the edge of the road. My hands were shaking so hard, I could barely keep the wheel straight. Toby was silent, just staring out the passenger window with wide eyes. We thought the danger was back at the bay, left in the water. But then I glanced in my rearview mirror and saw it. 2 pinpricks of light appeared in the distance behind us. They were moving fast, way faster than anyone should drive here. A massive set of headlights was gaining on us, and they weren't slowing. I sped up, taking the curves at a dangerous pace. The truck behind us did the exact same thing. Every time I accelerated, those lights stayed perfectly centered. It was like they were tethered to my rear bumper. Toby turned around in his seat, his face pale in the dashboard light. He told me he couldn't see the driver, just the glare. I tried to convince myself it was just some local in a hurry. But no one drives like that through a forest at 2,000 am. They were mimicking my every move, my every turn. It was the same social mirroring I'd seen on the water. Iwaswana was the same of rock. They weren't trying to pass me. They were just following, waiting for me to make a mistake or pull over. The paranoia from the boat was flooding back into the cab. We finally hit the main highway, and I floored it. The truck behind us roared, the engines sounding like a beast. They pulled right up to my tail, flashing their high beams. The light filled my entire truck, blinding me for a second. Toby was shouting now, telling me to just keep going. I didn't know if it was the people from the boat or someone else. But the intent was clear. They wanted us to stop. We were miles from the nearest police station or open store. It was just us, the pines, and this mechanical predator. I realized then that the ocean wasn't the only place with sharks. Some predators follow you all the way back to your doorstep. I gripped the wheel, praying we'd see another car soon. But the road ahead was as empty as the beach had been. The headlights were so close now, they were practically inside the cab with us. I could see the grille of the truck in my mirror. It was a massive chrome wall of metal reflecting my own panic. Toby was screaming for me to keep going, but the road was ending. Up ahead, the flickering neon of a 24-hour diner appeared. It looked like a lighthouse in the middle of a black pine sea. I didn't think. I just yanked the steering wheel hard to the right. The tires screamed as I slid the truck into the gravel lot. I slammed on the brakes right in front of the large windows. A few truckers were sitting inside, looking out in total confusion. I didn't care about the noise or the scene I was making. I just wanted people to see us in the light. I needed witnesses to whatever was coming out of that darkness. The black truck didn't follow us into the light of the parking lot. It didn't even slow down as it passed the diner entrance. It just roared past, a dark, heavy blur in the night. The sound of its engine faded into the pines almost instantly. We sat there for a long time, in total heavy silence. The only sound was the engine ticking as it cooled down. Neither of us was able to move or even speak for minutes. My hands were locked onto the steering wheel until they went numb. Toby finally looked at me, his face pale and drained of all color. He asked if I saw the driver when they roared past us. I hadn't seen a single thing through those tinted windows. I hadn't seen anything but the blinding glare of their high beams. We didn't even call the police that night, which sounds crazy now. But what would we even say to the officers? It took weeks before I could go back near the water again. Eventually, I started hearing stories from the older guys at the docks. They talked about a group of transients who moved between coastal towns. They lived on a salvaged barge and stayed completely off the grid. They weren't out there looking for fish or a summer vacation. They were looking for easy targets to rob in the dark. Specifically, kids on expensive boats they could strip for high-end parts. The social mirroring we experienced wasn't just a weird game. It was a calculated scouting tactic to see how we reacted to them. They watched how we handled the boat and how much we drank. They were waiting for the exact moment we were most isolated. If Toby hadn't been there, things would have ended very differently. If he hadn't sensed the shift in the air, I wouldn't be here. I don't think I would have ever made it back to the dock. A year later, I saw a post on a local community forum. Someone had snapped a grainy photo of a dark boat with no lights. It was anchored in the exact same bay where we had been. The comments were full of people with their own terrifying stories. They had been followed, watched, or even boarded in the dead of night. It's a chilling reminder that the ocean is a vast, lonely place. But the most dangerous things in the water aren't the sharks. And facts, they're the ones standing on the shore, waiting for the sun to go down. Never ignore your gut when the summer air suddenly turns cold.